Good morning, everybody. This is part 2 of the chapter from Farmer Boy that we started yesterday. It is a longer one, so I broke it up into 2 parts. We heard about the animals and the food at the fair yesterday, and today we're going to hear about a race that Almanzo attends, and we're going to find out about that pumpkin. So I'm going to present my book. We're on page 262. If you've got your own book, you can follow along. The very bottom of 262 is where we left off. So he just finished eating a meal that is about 5 times as big as a Thanksgiving meal should be. But he is finally full. He stopped eating his pie. Now, he was glad to sit down with Father in the grandstand. They watched the trotting horses flashing by, warming up for the races. Little puffs of dust rose in the sunshine behind the fast sulkies. Royal was with the big boys down at the edge of the track, with the men who were betting on the races. Father said it was all right to bet on races if you wanted to. You get a run for your money, he said, but I would rather get something more substantial for mine. So he's not telling him to not spend the money like the magician from the earlier in the chapter. He says for betting on a race, you could do, but it's still better not to. He'd rather spend his money on something substantial. By that, he means he wants to spend his money on something that he knows he'll be able to have. When you pay for a horse in a race, they may or may not win, so you don't know if you're going to get anything back. Now, the grandstand filled up till people were packed in all the tiers of seats. The light sulkies were lined up in a row. That's a type of horse. And the horses tossed their heads and pawed the ground, eager to start. Almanzo was so excited he could hardly sit still. Let me double check on the sulkies. Oh, it's the little cart, sorry. The sulky is the cart that the horse is carrying or dragging behind him. Now, Almanzo was so excited he could hardly sit still. He picked the horse he thought would win, a slim, bright, chestnut thoroughbred. Somebody shouted. All at once, the horses were flying down the track. The crowd was one roaring yell. Then, suddenly, everyone was still in astonishment. An Indian was running down the track behind the sulkies. There he is. So a Native American man is running on the racetrack with the horses. Sorry, I'm looking at it backwards, so I keep pointing at the wrong spot. He was running as fast as the horses. Everybody began to shout, he can't do it. $2 he'll keep up. The bay, come on. $3 on the Indian. Watch that chestnut. Look at that Indian. So he's saying they're all going back and forth on whether or not he can keep up with the horses. The horses are faster than people. That is bizarre that he would be fast enough to actually keep up with them. The dust was blowing on the other side of the track. The horses were flying, stretched out above the ground. All the crowd was up on the benches yelling. Almanzo yelled and yelled. Down the track, the horses came pounding. Come on, the bay. Now they flashed past too quickly to be seen. Who do you think is going to win? Behind came the Indian, running easily. In front of the grandstand, he leaped high in the air, turned a handspring, and stood saluting all the people with his right hand. The grandstand shook with the noise of shouting and stamping. Even Father was shouting, hooray, hooray! The Indian had run that mile in 2 minutes and 40 seconds, as fast as the winning horse. He was not even panting. Let's double check what was. So the Indian was just behind him, just about as fast. He was not even panting. He saluted all the cheering people again and walked off the track. So obviously he wasn't going to win a prize for it, even if he did come in first. But that is a huge accomplishment. It was just to show he could do it, that he was as fast as the horses. The bay horse had won. There were more races, but soon it was 3 o'clock. Time to go home. Driving home was exciting that day because there was so much to talk about. Royal had thrown a ring over one of the black and white striped canes, and he had it. Alice had spent a nickel for peppermint candy. She broke the striped stick in two, and each had a piece to suck slowly. It seemed strange to be at home. It seemed strange to be at home only long enough to do the chores and sleep. So they were out pretty late, and then they needed to go back again. Early the next morning, they were driving away again. There were 2 more days of the fair. So 3 days in a row, they could hardly be at home. That tells us they really did need to get all of the harvesting done beforehand because they aren't able to do any of it now. Now this morning, Almanzo and Father went quickly past the stock sheds to the display of vegetables and grains. Almanzo caught sight of the pumpkins at once. They shone out brightly, golden among all of the duller things. And there was Almanzo's pumpkin, the largest of them all. Don't be too sure of getting the prize, son, Father said. It isn't size that counts as much as quality. So he probably has the biggest pumpkin there. It says largest of them all, but that's not the only thing they're judging off of. Almanzo tried not to care too much about the prize. He went away from the pumpkins with Father, though he couldn't help looking back at his pumpkin now and then. He saw the fine potatoes, the beets, the turnips, rutabagas, and onions. He fingered the brown, plump kernels of wheat in the grooved pale oats, the Canada peas and navy beans and speckled beans. He looked at ears of white corn and yellow corn and red and white blue corn. Father pointed out how closely the kernels grow on the best ears and how they covered even the tip of the cob, so that's the sign of good corn. People walked slowly up and down, looking. There were always some people looking at the pumpkins, and Almanzo wished they knew that the biggest pumpkin was his. After dinner, he hurried back to watch the judging. The crowds were larger now, and sometimes he had to leave Father and squirm between people to see what the judges were doing. The 3 judges wore badges on their coats. They were solemn and talked together in low voices so that no one heard what they said. They weighed the grains in their hands and looked at them closely. They chewed a few grains of wheat and of oats to see how they tasted. They split open peas and beans, and they shelled a few kernels off each ear of corn to make sure how long the kernels were. With their jackknives, they cut the onions in two, and the potatoes. They cut very thin slices of the potatoes and held them up to the light. The best part of a potato is next to the skin, and you can see how thick the best part is if you hold a very thin slice to the light and look through it. The thickest crowd pressed around the table where the judges were and watched without saying anything. There wasn't a sound. When at last the tall, thin judge with the chin whiskers took a snip of red ribbon and a snip of blue ribbon out of his pocket. You know what those mean? Well, the red ribbon was second prize. The blue one was first prize. The judge put them on the vegetables that had won them, and the crowd breathed a long breath. Then, all at once, everybody talked. Almanzo saw that people who didn't get any prize and the person who got second prize all congratulated the winner. Oh, they're all good sports. Everybody's happy for the winner. If his pumpkin didn't get a prize, he would have to do that. He didn't want to, but he guessed he must. Now, at last, the judges came to the pumpkins. Almanzo tried to look as if he didn't care much, but he felt hot all over. The judges had to wait till Mr. Paddock brought them a big, sharp butcher knife. The biggest judge took it and thrust it with all his might into a pumpkin. He bore down hard on the handle and cut a thick slice out. He held it up, and all the judges looked at the thick, yellow flesh of the pumpkin. They looked at the thickness of the hard rind and at the little hollow where the seeds were. They cut tiny slices and tasted them. Then the big judge cut open another pumpkin. He had begun with the smallest. The crowd pressed tight against Almanzo. He had to open his mouth to get his breath. At last, the judge cut open Almanzo's big pumpkin. Almanzo felt dizzy. The inside of his pumpkin had a big hollow for seeds, but it was a big pumpkin. It had lots of seeds. Its flesh was a little paler than the other pumpkins. Almanzo didn't know whether that made any difference or not. He's thinking, is that a good thing or a bad thing? The judges tasted it. He could not tell from their faces how it tasted. Then they talked together for a long time. Can you imagine how Almanzo is feeling? He sees them. He doesn't know, is his a good one or not? And he can't tell from their faces. He could not hear what they said. The tall, thin judge shook his head and tugged his whiskers. She was talking about his beard. Or, well, they said chin whiskers, so I'm assuming it's his beard. He cut a thin slice from the yellowest pumpkin and a thin slice from Almanzo's pumpkin and tasted them. So they're tasting two of them again. He gave them to the big judge and he tasted them. The fat judge said something and they all smiled. Now, Mr. Paddock leaned over the table and said, "Good afternoon, Wilder. You and the boy are taking in the sight, I see. Having a good time, Almanzo?" Almanzo could hardly speak. He managed to say, "Yes, sir." Now, the tall judge had taken the red ribbon and the blue ribbon out of his pocket. Who's it gonna be? The fat judge took hold of his sleeve and all the judges put their heads together again. The tall judge turned around slowly. Slowly, he took a pin from his lapel and stuck it through the blue ribbon. It was not very near Almanzo's big pumpkin. He was not near enough to reach it. He held out the blue ribbon above another pumpkin. He leaned and stretched out his arms slowly, and he thrust the pin into Almanzo's pumpkin. Almanzo got the blue ribbon, which means first prize. Father's hand clapped on Almanzo's shoulder. He's so proud. All at once, Almanzo could breathe, and he was tingling all over. Mr. Paddock was shaking his hand. All the judges were smiling. Ever so many people said, "Well, well, Mr. Wilder, so your boy's got first prize." Oh, he's so proud. Oh, and look how big it is compared to Almanzo. There's his chin whiskers that they're talking about. Kind of looks like Abraham Lincoln. Now, as Mr. Webb said, "That's a fine pumpkin, Almanzo. Don't know as I ever saw a finer." Mr. Paddock said, "I never saw a pumpkin that beat it for size. How do you raise such a big pumpkin, Almanzo?" Now, what did he do that was so unique? Remember, it was a milk-fed pumpkin. So that's how he raised it. Suddenly, everything seemed big and very still. Almanzo felt cold and small and scared. He hadn't thought before, maybe it wasn't fair to get a prize for a milk-fed pumpkin. Maybe the prize was for raising pumpkins in the ordinary way. Maybe, if he told, they'd take the prize away from him. They might think he had tried to cheat. He looked at Father, but Father's face didn't tell him what to do. I kept hoeing it and," he said. Then he knew he was telling a lie. Father was hearing him tell a lie. He looked up at Mr. Paddock and said, "I raised it on milk. It's a milk-fed pumpkin. Is that all right?" "Yes, that's all right," Mr. Paddock answered. Father laughed. "There's tricks in all trades but ours, Paddock. And maybe a few tricks in farming and wagon making too, eh?" Oh, so it's okay for him to make a milk-fed pumpkin. Then Almanzo knew how foolish he had been. Father knew all about the pumpkin, and Father wouldn't cheat. That's a good point. He knew that Almanzo was giving it milk, so he would have told Almanzo not to do it if it was cheating. Now afterward, he went walking with the Father among the crowds. They saw the horses again. And the colt that won the prize was not so good as Starlight. Almanzo did hope that father would bring Starlight to the fair next year. Then they watched the foot races, and the jumping contests, and the throwing contests. Malone boys were in them, but the farmer boys won, almost every time. So Malone boys means the town boys, the town of Malone. But the farm boys are the ones who won. Now Almanzo kept remembering his prize pumpkin and feeling good. Driving home that night, and they all felt good. Alice's wool work had won first prize, and Eliza Jane had a red ribbon, and Alice had a blue ribbon for jellies. Father said the Wilder family had done itself proud that day. There was another day of the fair, but it wasn't so much fun. Almanzo was tired of having a good time. 3 days of it were too much. Do any of you ever feel that way? You're tired, even after a really fun day. It's almost like, that was exhausting having so much fun. It didn't seem right to be dressed up again and leaving the farm. He felt unsettled, as he did at house cleaning time. He was glad when the fair was over and everything could go on as usual. Hey, that's the end of the chapter. Isn't that a good one? I really enjoyed that one. In our next chapter, it's fall of the year. So we already heard in the late harvest time that it was really at the beginning of fall because there was that harvest moon, and we're getting further into fall now. So maybe this is like October or so. We are going to hear about what that's like. Remember at the very beginning of the book, it was winter time. So we're coming full circle. Basically, this book covers the entire year and will end at winter again. We even have a Christmas chapter coming up, I believe. Yep, Christmas. That's in a few chapters. Okay, that is all for today. After you're done with this video, I want you to write a summary of all of the things that were the most important events of this chapter. Think through some of the main things that happened. What were some of the things he saw at the fair? The animals, all the types of horses, and also some pigs and sheep. What else? There was the big dinner that Mother and the girls helped with, where he ate a ton. What else? The race that the Indian ran in, and he was almost as fast as the fastest horse. And the pumpkin judging time where Almanzo won first prize for the best pumpkin at the fair. Those are some of the things. You might even mention the little magic trick at the beginning too. But that is all. I'm going to have you do that, and there's some specific instructions for the types of sentences to include as well. But that's all for today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon.